My name is Courtney. If there's any questions throughout the presentation, please throw them in the chat or the Q&A. I have them both open, and the more interactive this is, the better it is for all of us. Make sure that I'm not just up here rambling and the information is helpful for you. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about credit and all the things that go into that. So I know there's a lot. Definitely let me know what questions you have. When we're just starting out talking about credit and thinking about credit, I like to think of it as your reputation on how well you do on paying things back. So you have a credit report and a credit score. Your credit report is going to have all of the information listed about your social security number, your name, previous addresses, any open items that you have on your credit report, anything that you've applied for, all that fun stuff. And then from there, it generates a score. So your score ranges from 300 to 850. Why it starts at 300, I have no idea, but it does. 850 is the highest. I've only seen an 850 credit score once in 7 years of looking at them. So you're not necessarily striving for perfection. Typically 720, 740 is a good spot to aim to get the lowest interest rate on loans. When you take out your first loan or credit card, your score is typically, it takes about 2 to 4 months, 2 to 6 months to really generate, and it'll start in the mid 600s. If you do things right, we'll talk about what that means. Your score goes up. If not, it's kind of like a GPA where it goes down a lot faster. It can take a while to build back up. Some things that are not on your credit report are listed up here as well. I think the biggest one that surprises people would be income. I'll tell you some of the lowest credit scores that I've seen are actually people that have some of the highest income that I've seen when I used to process loan applications for the credit union. So it's not really how much money you make, it's really what you're doing with it. And then from there, what happens. So I have a couple true or false. If you are up for it, please just put true or false in the chat. You can put it to everyone, or you can just do it to panelists, and that way only I will see. But the first one on here is you can pay a fee to improve your credit quickly. So do you think that is something that is true or false? If your credit's not doing so well, you pay a little fee and it can improve. All right, so I'm getting a couple of responses so far. False is correct. So there is like that Experian boost where people can add utilities and things like that in hopes that that will help improve their score. Unfortunately, the credit score that is delivered from that or calculated from that typically is not the same model or factors that's going to be looked at by financial institutions. So even that doesn't really help it, but there isn't really a quick fix with finances and a lot of things. If there is someone typically offering for you to pay a high fee and then, they promise that your credit score is going to improve, that's typically a good sign of like a scam or fraud. It is one of those things that takes a little bit of time, but can be done. The next one says having no credit is the same as having poor credit. So would it be true or false that if you have no credit or you have a really low credit score, that's kind of looked at as the same? All right, so I'm getting varied answers on this one. And it really does depend on how you look at it. So from a lender's perspective, when I used to process loan applications, when I looked at somebody who had no credit, nothing there, it was a blank slate, versus somebody who maybe had a couple credit cards or an auto loan already that they were not paying on. For me as a lender, yes, the person without any credit has no credit score. They don't have anything established yet, and the other person has a low credit score. I'm going to go with the blank slate because the other person has already proven that they aren't paying other people. So what makes us different that they would want to pay us? But when you're looking at it as interest rates, it's typically going to be the same. So if there was somebody that had a credit score of 400 or somebody that had no credit established, both of them are typically going to get the highest interest rate on that loan. It's usually looked at what that credit score is and the type of loan and the term to determine that. So if you don't have any credit score, it's going to lump you down into that lowest thing. At the credit union, if you are a student or have graduated within the past 12 months, you automatically get the lowest on most of our loan products. So keep that in mind. Because it does have a big impact on how much you're paying per month. The next one is it's best to wait until you need credit to start establishing it. So with this, would you want to wait maybe until you know you're going to need your first auto loan to really start thinking about what you're doing with your credit? Or is that something you want to plan for ahead of time? Okay, so yeah, this one is false. It's not, I definitely don't want to encourage anyone to take out loans or credit cards or anything that they don't need to just for the fun of it. But if you know you're going to have a higher amount loan coming up, you're going to want an auto loan, something like that, it can help to have credit established, especially if you are going somewhere that you are going to be getting the highest interest rate. If you don't, the impact of having, a 720 score versus no credit on an auto loan is huge. I'm going to show you a slide later on that really goes over the impact of interest that you would spend. So just starting to think, if you know you're going to need a loan in the next few months, it does take a couple months for a score to establish. So what can you do now to get yourself in a good spot? All right, the next one says you can establish credit with your debit card by selecting credit instead of debit when paying. Would that be true or false? Yeah, so false. I'm really glad that everyone's putting false for this one. I don't know why they worded it this way. It's really just depending on if you're using your PIN or a signature-based transaction, how it processes on the back end. But either way, with your debit card, it's coming out of your checking account. To help establish credit, it has to be loan funds. So it's going to be a totally separate credit card that you're going to have, and it's going to function a lot different than that debit card. All right, and last one, financial institutions and lenders report to credit bureaus once per week. So is it true or false that once a week, credit bureaus are updated with the information that's happening, and that's how they know really how to calculate your score and what you're doing? Okay, so this one is false. If anybody knows how frequent it is, you want to drop it in the chat. I'm curious to see. It's not once per week. Yes, once per month. Thank you. So typically it's the last day of the month or the first day of the month, but that's something to keep in mind, especially when we talk about payments coming up. If you're one day late on a payment, don't panic and think that's going to be a huge hit to your credit. It's a late payment is reported to credit bureaus when it's 30 days or more past due. So if you miss one day and then you get paid the next day and you pay it, you don't even get that late fee and you're in that safe zone, don't panic, but still always try and make your loan payments on time. Okay. So I know there's a lot of controversy around credits, credit cards, all that fun stuff of why do I need it? I don't want to be in debt. If I feel like I can pay for everything with cash, what's the point of credit? If you can budget and pay for things with cash, I think that is amazing. That is an awesome thing to have. But credit is used for so much more than just loans now. And there are ways to establish credit without really going into a ton of debt, especially with credit cards. You can use them without even paying interest every month. There's also ways to kind of offset it. So I know with me, like if I have an auto loan that's at, I think mine was at 1.99% for a little bit, would it make sense for me to pay that off sooner or put more money in savings that would be earning more than that? It's just kind of random things to think about. But okay, so it's your credit is used to see, are you even going to be approved for a loan or not? But then also what interest rate are you going to get, which is huge when you look at budgeting, and nobody really wants to spend more in interest and pay more to financial institutions than they have to. I work for one and I still don't want to. So having that interest rate is huge, but there's so much more now. A lot of apartment complexes, especially around East Lansing, pull credit to see, do they want you to live there? Job offers is a big one. So it does kind of depend on what field you're going into, but over 50% of employers pull your credit now. It's used kind of as a background check, but also if there's two applicants, so say you are applying for a job versus someone else, and you have very similar work experience and education, say they pull both credit reports and you have, a credit card with low debt, you've paid everything on time, and the other person maybe missed their auto loan payment the past 2 months. It might signify one, that they're not good at meeting deadlines and that's not why they're making those payments, or two, maybe they are financially stressed right now and they're not able to make these auto loan payments. Are they going to lose their vehicle and have a way to get to work? Are they going to be focused on their financial stress and not able to really focus at work? So it is something that employers look at. For insurance, the cost can be huge. So I went through a certification class at the end of last year. And we were kind of looking at the impact of credit on your budget and everything that you're paying. And when you look at auto insurance, if you have a low credit score versus 2 DUIs, I don't recommend either, but you are paying more on your auto insurance if you have low credit than you were if you had 2 DUIs and good credit. So the impact it has there, it's crazy that for auto insurance, it would look at that more than it would other things that have happened when you're driving, but it is a huge account there. And then a lot of utility companies have also started pulling credit to see. I know when I was in college, it was really easy to get mixed up with utilities. We moved every year and it was like, okay, I thought my roommate was in charge of turning this bill off when we moved to the other house, but they didn't turn it off. So we were being charged for a month or two. If that goes to collections, at that point, it might be harder to get other utility companies to give you, funds or whatever you need from them. And then you also might have to pay more, like put down deposits down to get some of these things. If anyone has questions, again, ask them in the chat. But up here, I have the biggest factors when it looks at how your credit score is going to be calculated. So as you can see, that biggest thing is payment history. We're going to break all these down. And it goes with payment history, amounts owed, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that means, length of history, new items that you have, and then credit types. So the first thing again is payment history. The best thing that you can do for your credit score is make your payments on time. One late payment reported to the credit bureau can take your score down about 100 points. It does vary depending on the type of loan, but then that can take about 2 years to get that score back where it was. If there's anything that you can do for your credit, it's making any loan payments, anything that's going to be reported to the credit bureau. So that's going to be loaned funds that you have. Make those on time or at least within that 30-day time frame. I just want to point out real quick with credit cards, you have a couple different options for making those payments. And I always recommend looking at your statement. Nobody looks at their credit card statement. I know that, but I highly encourage you to at least once every few months, just look at what your balance is. So you always have a minimum payment that you can pay. You have a full statement balance. If you pay that statement balance off, you're not paying interest that month. You can just make that minimum payment and that satisfies your payment for the month. It's typically 2 or 3% of what your overall balance is. But you can pay anywhere in between as well. So I always recommend looking at, if you only make that minimum payment, how long is it going to take you to pay that off and what are you paying in interest? Sometimes that can be a little motivation to pay a little extra if possible. But set up payment alerts or reminders if you need to. So I used to have e-alerts that would go off and tell me when a payment was due. Now I just set up automatic payments. So as soon as I get paid, it goes in and pays my loans. And then make sure you're making at least that minimum payment. When we're looking at amounts owed, it's not necessarily looking at your overall debt level. It's really looking at how much debt do you have in relation to how much debt you could have. So this is where credit cards are huge when looking at your credit score. This is where they can either help you or get you in a ton of trouble. I will tell you with credit cards, I'm going to talk a little bit about these as we're going through today. They can be your best friend with credit or they can be your worst enemy. When I was in college, they would give you free pizza for opening up a credit card, or come open this credit card and we'll give you a free shirt. There's predatory lending laws where those things are not allowed anymore, but it used to just be financial institutions wanted to give every student they could credit cards with no education, let them go from there. So I was someone who I had credit cards. I was working full time. I was going to school full time. And I just had all these credit cards that were given to me. So I started swiping them thinking once I graduate, I'm gonna have a lot of money. I can pay this off. It's not that easy. Credit card debt can build up really, really fast and it really impacts your score. So if you think you could handle a credit card responsibly, which we're going to talk about, it can be a great tool to help establishing your credit now and building that up. If you are worried, you would start swiping and worrying how to pay it later. I highly recommend waiting as long as you can, just because it's a really hard cycle to get out of once you do get into it. I'll tell you, for me, my credit card debt was out of control and my credit score because of it, because of these factors, was probably low 500s, high 400s. It's now over 800, but it took a lot of time to get there. So with credit cards, just make sure that you're ready. So this example up here, I like to think of it as glasses of water. So this person has 2 credit cards. Sometimes people have more than 1 credit card. Sometimes they have one with a low rate in case they need to keep a balance on it. Maybe there's one with rewards, ones that earns like flyer miles, things like that. So this person has 2 cards. If you look at, they have $1,000 limit, so they can spend up to $1,000 on this first card, but they owe nothing. So they have all of it available. On the second credit card, they have another $1,000 limit. So altogether, they could be spending 2,000 and they're only spending 500. So when you factor this together, this looks really good to the credit bureau. The credit bureau is looking at this. They want you to use 25% or less. Even though they give you more, it's kind of like a test, like, do you need to use this to live off, or is it just here to help you? Keep in mind, credit cards are there for emergencies. So if that does go up higher or it is maxed out, just making a plan to pay that off is big. So here when we're looking at the other person, they closed that first card that they had open with that $0 balance. So if you look at both of these people, sorry, I have something in my throat. They have the exact same amount of debt that they owe. They both owe $500, but this one is going to have a bigger impact on their credit score. To the credit bureau, it looks like this person might be using their credit card to supplement income. So they have 50% available while this person is 75% available. So that's kind of where making sure you're not maxing those cards out right away can be really, really, really helpful for your credit score. I know when I used to do more lending, I would have students ask if they could just have a $500 limit, and we would have the conversation of what are you going to use this card for? And if it's for books, if you have a $500 limit, you can easily max that out in one purchase, and then you're taking you a while to get any availability there. Whereas if we gave you one with, maybe 1,500, you charge that $500 worth of books, don't charge anything else, keep that availability. It can help your credit score a lot. But again, if you think you would just spend as high as that limit goes, then it can still be helpful to have a smaller limit. Are there any questions so far? I'll keep going if not. Okay, so next it's looking at length of history. So just like most things, the credit bureaus want to know how long have you been able to uphold the things you've been doing. The longer that you've had good payments, or the longer you've been able to keep credit cards open and in good standing, or excuse me, loans open in good standing, the better that is for you. It shows that it's not just like a one-off thing, but maybe it's built in and habitual. So this is where loans that you have for a long time are really helpful. Credit cards, again, can be loans that are open for a long time because they're revolving. I have a credit card open that I opened when I was 18. I don't use it very much, but having that many years of history is a huge factor for my credit score. And then mortgages, and if you get another loan that you can have for a longer amount of time, those are good impacts here. Mortgages are typically 30-year loans, so as you're paying on that for a while, it helps. But again, this is one where credit cards can be helpful. So here we have Sparty and Marty. Sparty, they both have cards that were open 7 years ago, 3 years ago, and 1 year ago. And then they're overwhelmed. They have too many cards, too many payments to keep track of. They don't want it. Or maybe one has an annual fee, so they decide to get rid of that one. So Sparty closes the card that was open 1 year ago. This card will fall off and not be factored into the credit history probably a month or two after they cancel it. So then after that, it's going to look and just factor in the credit history that it has here. So it's going to average out to 5 years. Marty, on the other hand, closed the card that was open 7 years ago. So once that falls off, he only has 2 years of payment history going back. So that's where kind of thinking about that impact of the length of amount of time you have things open and what that can do. This isn't to say don't close cards or don't close items, especially if they have like high fees or annual things that you're paying, or you just really need to simplify. I'm not saying definitely don't close cards. It's really just thinking about, do I have something coming up? Am I going to be applying for maybe an auto loan or a mortgage in the future where maybe it would be helpful to keep this open for another month or two, wait until after I apply for that and then close it. And then my score can take a little hit and work its way back up. So just something to think about there. I know for me, when we were getting our mortgage, I had almost paid off my auto loan around that time. I think it was like 8 years ago now. And I could have paid my auto loan off, but I knew cutting off that 5 years of history would probably have an impact. So I paid like enough just to get by, but then I had like $1 that I owed by the time we had applied for the mortgage. That way that loan was still open and that history was still there. As soon as we applied, then I paid that off. And then my score did go down just a little bit, but it fell right back up after. And then the other thing is new credit. So you've probably heard anytime your credit is pulled, it can impact your credit score. If anyone knows the difference between a soft pull and a hard pull, we put that in the chat now, and I'll talk about this and we'll touch on that at the end. But anytime your credit is pulled, it shows up on your credit report, and it'll look just like this over here. It'll show who pulled it, when it was pulled. It will be on your credit report for 2 years, and it shows a little bit more about why it was pulled. Was it for an auto loan, credit card? Sometimes it doesn't have that much detail. So if you're applying for, again, mortgage, auto loan, it makes sense to shop around because you want to make sure you're getting the best rate. So with those, it doesn't have as big of an impact, but if you maybe submitted 10 credit card applications, even if they were all denied, that would take a huge hit to your credit score. The credit bureau wants to know, what did you do, or what kind of trouble are you trying to get into that you need this many credit cards all at once? So with those, it's really, there's something over here called a Schumer box, where you can do your research ahead of time. All credit cards, whether it's with a bank, credit union, store, anything has these. And it gives you a range of rates. You can read that fine print, see what those fees are. Is the interest rate going to vary depending on how you use the card? But you can gather those details ahead of time and then submit the application. And yes, the hard pull affects your credit score. So that's going to be if you have the opportunity of taking on more debt, would be a hard pull. A soft pull does not. So a soft pull would be if you are pulling your own credit, which I'll show you how to do to see, if everything's accurate on there. Or if a few potential employers pulling your credit, insurance, things like that, where it's not the opportunity to take on more debt, it's not going to impact your credit score. But again, even if it has the opportunity to and you're denied, it does impact your credit. And then the last one, and this is the one I probably struggle with the most, is the next factor is, what variation do you have in your credit? So this can be where it gets a little bit hard because credit bureaus don't want to see you only having like a credit card or a store card. They kind of look at it as maybe a little bit of good debt versus bad debt. They think like the good debt would be those installment loans where maybe it's a student loan that's going to help you, advance in your career, or a mortgage where, you're investing in a home. Whereas credit cards or store cards can be used more to supplement income or some of those things. So this is where it's hard for me. When I only had revolving debt, I had credit cards for a while and I got them under control. I was getting my score looking good, but I still couldn't get it above like 690, 700. And I wanted to get it at least to that 720 spot. It wasn't until I took out my auto loan. When I applied for that, my score went down maybe like 10 points. And then after a while of me paying on that, then it shot up to like 720, 730 while I worked on some other things. So this is where it can be hard when it wants to have that variation, but this is where kind of looking at other options that you have. If you maybe have $1,000 in savings and an emergency pops up, what are you making on that $1,000 versus the interest rate you would be paying? If you took out a loan, would you be making more on the funds on deposit than what you're paying? Would it make sense to maybe take that out of there and then work to pay it off? So just kind of thinking of some other things. But again, this is where it can be hard because I don't think anybody should take out loans unless they need them. So it can be kind of frustrating when you're stuck, with just a couple of these or maybe just an auto loan. But this is one of the factors, so I like to touch on it. We get a lot of questions on why interest rates do vary on different loan types. So a lot of that is looking at risk levels. If a loan is secured and there's collateral backing it up, it's a lot less risky for lenders and financial institutions to take on. So it has those lower interest rates. Thinking of like an auto loan, a boat, an RV, if you stop paying on those, they can be repossessed and sold to try and recover some of the costs. Whereas if it's unsecured loans and there's nothing backing it up, if somebody took out a $10,000 loan for an engagement ring and then call off the engagement and don't want to pay that back, yes, that debt is going to follow that person around. It's going to show as a charge off on their collection, all that stuff if they don't pay it, but the financial institution can still be out a lot of money. So it is riskier. So those interest rates are going to be a little bit higher. And then your interest rate is going to depend on, like I said, that loan type, how long you have that loan out for, and your credit score. So sometimes people want to have a shorter term on those loans. So again, that's looked at as less risky. So those typically have a lower interest rate. It's just less time that you have for life to happen to you. We've seen people that, have 840 credit scores, have never missed a payment on anything. And then maybe over the past year and a half, life happened because of COVID and they were unable to make those payments. So that's why even with those longer terms, even if you have great credit, it's typically a higher interest rate just because there is more time for life to happen. With the shorter terms, you pay less over the life of the loan, so you're saving money, but you do pay more per month. So a lot of times budget-wise, people will go with that longer term because it fits better with that monthly budget, understanding that they're going to pay a little bit more in interest. If you do go with the longer term and you're able to start paying that off early, great. Just always check with your lender or your financial institution to see if they have any prepayment penalties. Some places will charge you a fee if you pay off a loan early because they're losing money in interest. So definitely ask on that because it can be extremely frustrating to think financially you're doing something right by paying off a loan and then you get hit with a fee. So definitely look into that. Up here just shows some ranges of rates based on, over here on the left side is credit scores and auto loans. So it just shows if you're typically between 500 and 589, you're going to be between that 14 and 16%. If you're 720 to 850, you're typically between 2 and 4%. So think of that, of some of these auto loans that are 60, 70, $80,000, that 10% interest, what's that going to have, you know, that difference. And then over here, we have a lot of people ask us, is this a good interest rate on my credit card? I don't know what good rates are. So this just shows some averages. This one was from creditcards.com and the information on the left was from Value Penguin. I will tell you with us, our lowest one is 9.9%. And as a student, you automatically get that. So if you don't have a credit card, just some things to keep in mind. I always recommend look at your financial institution, make sure it's somebody that you trust, but look at those rates. Here's going to show a little bit more about the impact that it can have on your budget. This is just a $20,000 auto loan. So I know I say just $20,000, but if you're looking at new vehicles, they typically start 30, 40 now. So this would be a $20,000 auto loan being paid off over 5 years, which is pretty standard for an auto loan. If you have a score of 720, you could get the lowest rate, which is 2.49% APR. If you had 638, so this is not even 100 points less. Remember, you can lose 100 points for one late payment. It goes up to 9.59% APR. So this just shows the difference of what that would be in your monthly budget. As you can see, I think it's a difference of like 60 something bucks, 66 bucks, if I'm doing my math right in my head. But over the life of the loan, that's almost $4,000 more in interest that you're paying. So if you took that $4,000 over 5 years and broke that down per month, what would you be saving each month? Well, we look at that up there, that you're not having to spend on interest. What could you do with that each month? Could you put it in savings? Could you put it towards student loan debt? Could you invest it? A lot of people are asking, like, how do I find these funds for investing? A lot of it is making little changes like this and looking at how much am I paying on interest? How can I get my credit score better so that I'm saving this money per month? What little things can I cut out to be able to do these things? And I think with credit, a lot of times people don't realize the actual impact that it has on what they're spending. And this I just thought was really impactful. Again, if you're somebody that might start swiping your card and then wonder like what to do, or, oh, I can just pay this off really quickly. If you had a $2,000 limit and say you bought books, you got a new laptop, okay, there's $2,000 spent. And you want to pay $50 a month. So you're paying more than what that minimum fee would be, or that minimum payment each month at 9.9%. That's still going to take you over 4 years to pay that off. So sometimes when you look at it that way, is it worth it to charge this knowing that I'm going to be paying for this 4 years later? And kind of having it with that mindset can help a lot. So again, just kind of keeping in mind, credit cards can be extremely helpful, but once those balances are racked up, it can be really hard to get that down, especially because if you have a limit of $1,000 and you charge $1,000, you make a $20 payment that month. Well, then now you don't have that $20, then you charge $20 on your credit card. It's back up to $1,000, pay $20, and get in that cycle. It's debt that really sticks with you forever. Sometimes when you look at the impact of that interest again, it can be eye-opening. So this is what I do now, and this is what I recommend to anyone that does have a credit card and they're wondering how to use it the best way so they're not getting in debt, they're building up their credit score, they're not really paying interest. I do this now with my Netflix, so it's $14 a month. I know no matter what, I can always pay $14 a month. So I switched that coming out of my checking account and I actually have it going on my credit card now. So the $14 gets charged there in the middle of the month. I wait for it to cycle through, and then on my due date each month, I pay that off in full. I'm not paying any interest. I wait for the due date just so that way that activity does cycle through. If I, charged it today and then paid it off tomorrow, there probably was never going to be a payment that was calculated, depending on when it is in your credit card cycle, that would even show up, show that a payment was due, for there even to be activity that reports. So that's why I wait for my due date. I pay it off in full. I'm not paying any interest. So that way I'm hitting that payment each month. I have the full availability, and it just keeps that history going. So I'm hitting some of those main things. Some other tips would be to review your credit. Over 30% of credit reports have errors on them that could be bringing your score down, especially if you're somebody that pays on time every month. You don't want to have your score go down because somebody else made an error. You can dispute stuff you see on there. Definitely do that, especially if you think it was an error by your financial institution. Get a hold of them. They can help correct that pretty easy. If it's something else, you can contact the financial or the credit bureaus. Keep your debt low and just research. Make sure you know what you're getting into with loans, especially avoid payday loans and things like that, where it's that instant cash. Those can have interest rates up to 700%. So we looked at calculations with like 9 point whatever percent. Imagine if it's 700%. And then for you to be able to pull your own credit, there's annualcreditreport.com. This does not give you your score, so you have to pay for your score, but you can pull from each credit bureau. If you're going to look at typically the one that's most accurate or the ones that most lenders and financial institutions use, it's going to be Experian, but you can pull from each. And if you ever wonder why your scores differ between the credit bureaus, they don't all get the same information. So financial institutions and lenders are not legally required to report to all three. So some will only report to one or two. Sometimes they have different information on them, and they also use different scoring models to see how things are calculated. So I know, like for me, I have Credit Karma that I use personally. I don't use it to see what my score is because it's very different than what my real score actually is, but I use it for security because one time I applied for an auto loan and it popped right up telling me your credit was just pulled. So I like that sense of it. But as far as the score, I would not base it off of what you see there. And then that's really the main credit information that I have for you. We do have a Wallet Watch podcast that has a lot of information. And then we do have a credit quiz. Wow, I'm having a hard time talking. A credit quiz on our app or website where it's going to be up through the end of August, I believe. And if you get 80% or better, you're entered to win a $25 gift card. So if you've learned, stuff about credit today, go put it to the test and see how you do there. But I'll hang out for a little bit in case anyone has any questions about credit cards, loans, a little bit more about reporting, credit bureau, any of that fun stuff. I didn't see any come in through the Q&A.